The sky was painted in muted hues of violet and amber, the night my childhood completely fell apart. I was only 8 years old, sitting quietly in the back seat of our car, nervously twisting the ears of my favorite worn-out teddy bear. We were taking the familiar route to my grandmother's house in a quiet suburb of Boston. Back then, I didn't feel any dread. I genuinely adored visiting Nana. Her home always smelled deeply of cedarwood and dried chamomile, and she would invariably welcome me with a tight, enveloping embrace. But that specific evening felt unsettlingly off. The moment the car tires crunched onto her gravel driveway, my mother shifted around from the front seat, her facial features stiff and strained. "We just need a little bit of time to sort some things out," she murmured, completely avoiding my gaze. "Make sure you're on your best behavior for Nana." That was the entirety of her speech. There was no detailed talk, no comforting hugs, and no real goodbye. The words were delivered with a cold, rehearsed precision, as if she had practiced them meticulously in front of a mirror all day long. Being far too young to comprehend the permanent gravity of that moment, and possessing the absolute innocence of a child who trusted her parents implicitly, I simply nodded. I hauled myself out of the vehicle, adjusting the straps of my small canvas backpack. Nana was already standing on the front porch, offering a gentle smile, though a deep flicker of sorrow in her eyes suggested she was fully aware of what was happening. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around me, but my attention was instantly pulled elsewhere. My parents' car was already shifting into reverse, backing down the driveway. "Wait!" I cried out, a sudden wave of panic tightening my throat. I bolted forward a few steps, completely expecting the brake lights to flash, fully believing my mother would roll down the window to tell me it was all just a silly misunderstanding. But the vehicle didn't slow down. It turned sharply onto the main road, and within moments, the taillights vanished into the evening shadows. I stood entirely frozen on the pavement, staring into the empty street as my pulse raced. They would definitely return for me. They had to. This was just a brief stay. It had to be. That night, Nana cooked my absolute favorite homemade mac and cheese, trying her best to bring a smile to my face, but I could barely swallow a single bite. Later, she tucked me into the crisp sheets and softly hummed a familiar melody. But the absolute second the bedroom door clicked shut and darkness took over, I buried my face deep into the mattress and wept uncontrollably. When morning arrived, I pulled a chair up to the front window, keeping my eyes locked on the asphalt, watching for our car to reappear. It never did. Days slowly blurred into weeks, and weeks stretched into long months. Yet my routine never changed. Every single day after elementary school, I would sprint straight to that window, my chest tightening with a sudden burst of hope whenever the rumble of a passing engine echoed down the street. But that hope would instantly collapse into a heavy, crushing ache when the car inevitably drove past. Night after night, I cried myself to sleep in the quiet room, whispering the exact same heartbreaking question into the dark. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I worth keeping? Nana refused to let me drown in that sea of self-blame. Whenever she saw me spiraling, she would sit right at the edge of my bed, gently stroking my hair with a calm, unshakable warmth. "Sometimes, sweetie, certain people are simply not equipped to be parents," she would tell me softly, her voice steady and grounded. "But you must understand, that is a reflection of them, not a single fault of yours." I desperately wanted to internalize her words, but a bitter reality had already rooted itself deep within my soul. My parents hadn't just hit a rough patch, they had actively looked at me and made a conscious decision to walk away. Growing up under Nana Evelyn's roof was completely different from anything I had ever known. She was an incredibly brilliant, quietly elegant woman who carried herself with immense discipline, yet she possessed a heart of pure gold. She lived in a very modest, traditional house, drove an old sedan with far too many miles on the odometer, and spent her days working tirelessly as a high school principal, even though she didn't actually need the income. It wasn't until much later in life that I discovered the staggering extent of her wealth. Nana truly didn't care for luxury or showing off. She placed all her value on honest labor, a solid education, and carrying oneself with absolute self-respect. She had an extraordinarily sharp mind for finance, often looking over Wall Street journals while sipping her morning coffee, casually tracking investments that went completely over my head as a child. But despite her vast financial success, she never allowed material things to define who she was. And under her incredible guidance, I truly began to thrive. She recognized and nurtured my intense passion for chemistry and biology, fueling my curiosity by buying me advanced books, setting up miniature lab experiments on the porch, and engaging in endless dinner table debates about how the physical world worked. Whenever a subject at school challenged me, she immediately brought in top-tier tutors, refusing to ever let me believe I was incapable of mastering it. Every single evening, she would sit right alongside me at the kitchen table, guiding me through the most complex homework assignments without a shred of impatience or condescension. "Knowledge is the ultimate equalizer, my brilliant girl," she would tell me with a proud, knowing smile. "And mark my words, you are going to leave a massive mark on this world." The absolute first time I actually allowed myself to believe her words was when I captured the grand prize at the New England Regional Science Fair. I was 13 years old, and I had dedicated months of grueling work to my project, poring over endless research papers, running trials, failing repeatedly, and retesting until it was perfect. I hadn't truly expected to place it all. Standing beneath the bright lights of that massive stage, hearing my name echoed across the loudspeakers felt completely unreal. My hands shook violently as I gripped the heavy trophy, my eyes frantically scanning the crowded auditorium until I finally spotted her. Nana Evelyn was standing all the way at the back of the room, radiating pure joy, her hands clasped tightly together in celebration. That very evening, she threw an incredible party at our house, opening the doors to all my classmates, my teachers, and even her own professional colleagues. The entire place was alive with music, vibrant chatter, and the rich aroma of her famous baked ziti. "That's my incredible girl," she whispered softly, wrapping me in a tight, protective embrace amidst the noise. "This is just the absolute beginning for you." And right then, in that exact moment, a profound shift happened within me. I realized I didn't need to stand by that front window anymore. I completely stopped analyzing my parents, stopped wishing for their sudden return, and stopped agonizing over why they had abandoned me. I had Nana, and she was entirely more than enough. The years flew by in a blur of academic milestones and quiet comfort, and before I could fully process it, I found myself in a beautifully styled bistro celebrating my 18th birthday. Nana had rented out her absolute favorite local spot for the evening, filling the room with my closest friends, trusted mentors, and high school teachers. During the dinner, she stood up to give a toast, her voice completely steady and thick with emotion as she spoke about the resilient young woman I had grown into. But the real moment happened after the celebration had wound down and the last of the guests had drifted out. Back home, she quietly slipped a small, elegant velvet box into my hand. I carefully popped the latch to reveal a delicate, shimmering gold chain adorned with a tiny, intricately detailed key pendant. "This is far more than a simple piece of jewelry, Chloe," she murmured, her eyes locked onto mine with an intense, unreadable significance. "One day very soon, you will understand exactly what it means." I ran my thumb over the smooth, metallic edges of the key, entirely puzzled but deeply moved by the gesture. "Is it meant to unlock something specific?" I questioned. But Nana merely offered a mysterious, gentle smile. "You'll know precisely when the hour arrives." I didn't press her for answers that night. At the time, I had absolutely no inkling that this would mark our final celebration together. I had no way of knowing that a mere 3 months down the road, my entire reality would be violently upended once again. I never, even for a second, imagined I would lose her so tragically soon. The devastating news arrived right in the middle of a mundane Tuesday afternoon. I had just put the finishing touches on a grueling university prep assignment when my phone began to vibrate on the desk. I very nearly let it go to voicemail, assuming it was just a casual check-in from one of my campus friends. But the second I answered and heard the trembling voice on the other end, my heart stopped completely. "Chloe, it's about your grandmother. You need to get to the hospital immediately." By the time I frantically burst through the hospital doors, she was already gone. "A sudden, massive heart attack," the attending doctor explained. "Swift, unexpected, and entirely painless." But the agonizing grief that ripped through my chest was anything but painless. It completely hollowed me out from the inside, leaving a vast, freezing void. One moment, she was my unshakable anchor, my entire family, and the center of my universe. The next, she was simply gone, leaving me to navigate the dark completely alone. I moved through the subsequent days in a numbing, surreal fog. Funeral arrangements were finalized, and a steady stream of acquaintances offered quiet, well-meaning condolences, but none of it registered as real. The memorial service was incredibly beautiful, mirroring the exact dignity with which she had lived her life. Generations of her former high school students completely filled the chapel, standing in solemn rows, quietly sharing moving stories about how Nana Evelyn had fundamentally altered the trajectory of their lives. Some recounted how she fiercely pushed them to realize their potential when no one else cared, while others spoke of her quiet generosity, revealing moments where she had financially supported struggling families completely behind the scenes. I sat in the very front pew, my knuckles white as I desperately gripped the tiny gold key necklace she had gifted me, struggling to draw air past the heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on my chest. I was entirely alone in the world now. Or, at least, that is what I honestly believed. Then the chapel doors swung open and they walked in. I felt their presence before I even turned around. A sharp, icy prickle traveling straight down my spine. The unmistakable, suffocating weight of old ghosts invading a sacred space they had absolutely no right to enter. I turned my head slowly, and there they stood. My mother's hair was now heavily streaked with silver, her once flawlessly polished face looking noticeably more worn and tense. My father had put on considerable weight, his typically arrogant, confident posture looking entirely forced and unnatural. But their eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, hadn't altered in the slightest. I had spent a decade trying to erase every single memory of them from my mind, yet I would have recognized them anywhere. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, my fingers tightening around the gold pendant until the edges dug into my skin. They glided down the aisle toward me with an air of practiced, theatrical concern, their faces carefully arranged into elaborate masks of deep sorrow. "Chloe, sweetheart," my mother whispered smoothly, reaching out an elegant hand to touch my shoulder. I recoiled instantly, pulling my body away before her fingers could make contact. "We got on the first flight the second we received the news," my father chimed in, shaking his head with a solemn, practiced gravity, as if he possessed any legitimate right to mourn her passing. "We are just so incredibly sorry about your grandmother." I sat there completely paralyzed, the air trapped in my throat. For 10 long years, I had sat by that front window imagining this exact confrontation. I had spent countless nights rehearsing the fierce, biting words I would unleash if they ever dared to face me again. But now that they were actually standing right in front of me, the only thing coursing through my veins was pure, unadulterated rage. "You'll be packing up and coming home with us, of course," my mother continued seamlessly, her soft tone shifting into something noticeably firmer, revealing her true colors. "You're still technically a minor for a few more months, and legally, we are still your parents and guardians." The remaining oxygen completely drained from my lungs. I forced myself to breathe, barely managing to push the words past my teeth. "I am not going anywhere with you." My mother's artificial warmth vanished instantly, her expression hardening into a familiar coldness. "Chloe, do not make a scene and be difficult. We are your parents. You don't have a choice in this matter." A familiar, icy clarity settled over me. This was the moment of truth. They hadn't rushed across the country because they cared about my well-being, or because they regretted throwing me away. They had come solely to claim whatever material wealth Nana had left behind. But before I could even open my mouth to lash out, a completely different voice sliced cleanly through the suffocating tension. "Actually, she has every choice in the world," a deep, authoritative voice interrupted from behind them. We all turned sharply. A tall, impeccably dressed man in a tailored charcoal suit stepped forward from the shadows of the chapel, a heavy leather briefcase gripped firmly in his hand. He was completely calm and composed, carrying the demeanor of someone who had anticipated this exact ambush down to the very second. "My name is James Morrison," he announced, looking directly at my parents with zero warmth. "I am Evelyn Montgomery's personal estate attorney, and I believe it is vital that we have an immediate conversation regarding her final will and testament." For the absolute first time since my parents had invaded the church, I watched a profound shift register across their features. Pure, unadulterated greed flashed openly across their faces. My mother's eyes flickered with a poorly concealed, desperate hunger, while my father immediately straightened his silk tie, his gaze locking hungrily onto the attorney's briefcase. They didn't even bother to maintain the pathetic charade of comforting me anymore. James Morrison offered them a brief, entirely professional nod. "Let us step into the private conference room down the hall. There are highly urgent legal matters that must be addressed immediately." As I silently followed the attorney down the corridor, my pulse throbbed in my temples. My parents had audaciously walked back into my life, assuming they could simply snap their fingers and regain total control over my existence. But a powerful intuition told me they were about to walk straight into a brutal, unforgiving awakening. The private conference room down the hall felt suffocatingly small, the air thick with a volatile tension. The highly polished mahogany table cutting across the center of the room might as well have been a designated battlefield. My parents positioned themselves on either side of me, but their attention wasn't focused on me in the slightest. Their eyes were entirely locked onto the man seated directly across from us, James Morrison. Nana Evelyn's attorney remained completely unshaken, his expression an unreadable mask as he methodically extracted thick stacks of legal paperwork from his leather briefcase. He moved with the quiet, absolute confidence of a seasoned professional who had mapped out this exact scenario down to the last detail. Before unscrewing his pen, he adjusted his glasses and looked directly at me. Miss Chloe, before we officially begin, would you mind letting me view your necklace? I hesitated for a brief second, but slowly reached for the gold chain resting against my collarbone, lifting the tiny key pendant so it was clearly visible. James offered a brief, approving nod. Perfect. My parents exchanged highly confused, irritated glances across the table. My father cleared his throat loudly, leaning forward. What on earth does a simple piece of jewelry have to do with any of this? James completely ignored the interruption, cleanly flipping open the first cover page of the dense legal documents. Now let us proceed directly with the reading of the last will and testament of Evelyn Montgomery. The room fell so incredibly silent that the faint ticking of the wall clock sounded like a drumbeat. As James began reciting the standard legal preambles and corporate jargon, my mind drifted entirely. This didn't feel real. It couldn't be real. Nana was supposed to be sitting right next to me, guiding me through this like she always did. I squeezed the tiny key tightly in my palm, using the metallic edges to anchor myself to reality. And then James's voice grew noticeably distinct. To my beloved granddaughter, Chloe Grace Montgomery, I officially bequeath my entire estate. This encompasses all residential properties, commercial real estate, global investment portfolios, bank accounts, and corporate business holdings, currently valued at an estimated $47 million. The sheer weight of the words slammed into me like a massive tidal wave, leaving me completely breathless. The entire room erupted instantly. What? My mother shrieked, bolting upright from her leather chair, her face turning an alarming, blotchy shade of crimson. That is an absolute lie. That's impossible! She was a public high school principal. My father slammed his fist onto the polished wood table with a deafening thud. This has to be a total mistake. We are her actual flesh and blood children. How could she legally leave an entire fortune to an inexperienced teenager? James remained completely unfazed by the outburst, calmly turning to the next page of the document. There is absolutely no mistake, sir. Evelyn Montgomery was an extraordinarily brilliant and shrewd investor. While she chose to dedicate her daily life to the public education system, she built Montgomery Investments entirely from the ground up, maintaining an incredibly lucrative portfolio of highly valuable assets over several decades. And per her explicit, legally binding instructions, every single asset now belongs entirely to Chloe. My father's nostrils flared with intense rage. This isn't right. We only left her in. You completely abandoned Chloe into Evelyn's sole custody exactly 10 years ago, James interrupted smoothly, his voice cutting through the anger like a razor. And furthermore, you legally signed away every single parental right you possessed. He reached deep into his briefcase, extracted a stamped document, and slid it directly across the table. My mother's hand shook violently as she snatched it up, her eyes frantically scanning the text as the remaining color drained entirely from her face. This is a certified copy of the legal abandonment and termination of parental rights papers that Evelyn filed with the court, James continued coldly. You completely ignored the official court summons at the time, meaning she was granted absolute, permanent custody. You haven't been Chloe's legal guardians for a very long time. I kept my eyes locked on their faces, waiting for a single hint of remorse, some shred of realization regarding the sheer cruelty of what they had done a decade ago. But it was painfully obvious. They weren't horrified because they had thrown away their daughter. They were utterly horrified that their selfish actions had finally caught up to them. My mother's hands balled into tight fists, the paperwork wrinkling under her grip. This will cannot be legitimate. She was clearly mentally manipulated in her old age. We will fight this in court. We will contest it. James didn't even blink. You are completely welcome to try, but I assure you with absolute certainty that every single line of this document is completely airtight. She prepared for this exact day for years. Every signature is verified, every clause is ironclad, and every asset transfer was executed with flawless legal precision. My father leaned across the table, gritting his teeth. You cannot honestly expect us to just turn around and walk away from our own mother's massive fortune." James met his furious stare with practiced, unshakable ease. "You already did exactly that 10 years ago." An intense, suffocating silence filled the room. I tightened my grip on the gold necklace, my fingers pressing hard against the smooth surface of the key. This was truly happening. My entire world had just fundamentally shifted. James cleared his throat, breaking the silence as he adjusted his papers. Additionally, the terms of the will specify that Chloe is to be granted immediate legal emancipation. A comprehensive trust fund has been established in her name to guarantee absolute financial security moving forward. My mother shook her head aggressively, her tone turning incredibly sharp. "She is practically still a child. She has absolutely no idea how to manage that magnitude of wealth. That is precisely why Evelyn spent the last 10 years personally educating and preparing her for this responsibility," James countered smoothly. "And it is exactly why she made absolutely certain that neither of you would ever be able to lay a finger on a single cent." My mother's face twisted into an expression of pure fury, but then a terrifying shift occurred. She looked at me, her voice suddenly dropping into a sickly, sweet, manipulative purr. "Chloe, sweetie, you don't fully understand what you're doing here. Let us help you handle all of this. We are your family." I lifted my gaze, looking her dead in the eye, and finally the words rushed out of me with absolute certainty. "Where exactly was my family when you threw me away like garbage?" Neither of them answered. Where was my family for the last 10 long years while Nana was the only person raising me, supporting me, and loving me? My voice trembled slightly with the weight of a decade of unshed tears, but I refused to back down an inch. "You didn't fly out here for me. You came because you smelled money." My father let out a harsh, defeated breath. "We made a lot of mistakes back then, Chloe. But we are here right now. We can fix this. We can make things right between us." A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my lips. "Make things right?" I pushed my chair back forcefully and stood up, my hands clenched into tight fists at my sides. "You honestly believe you can just stroll back into my life after a decade of silence just because there's a fortune involved? You think I would ever let you?" Their complete silence was the only answer I needed. James quietly stacked his papers together, his expression entirely calm. "There is one final matter to address." I turned back toward him as he pulled a thick, wax-sealed envelope from his briefcase and slid it gently toward my side of the table. "Evelyn left a personal letter specifically for you, Chloe. Her explicit instruction was that you read it completely alone." I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat, reaching out with trembling fingers to take the envelope. The physical weight of the paper felt heavier than anything I had ever carried in my life. Without uttering another single syllable to the people sitting across from me, I turned on my heel and walked straight toward the heavy wooden door. I walked away from my parents without a second glance, because they had already walked away from me once, and I was never going to give them the chance to do it again. I sat completely isolated in one of the empty, shadowed church pews, the thick envelope trembling violently in my grip. The angry, muffled arguments echoing from the private conference room felt incredibly distant now, fading into mere background noise compared to the emotional storm raging within my chest. I traced the pads of my fingers over the crisp parchment, staring intently at my name written in Nana Evelyn's elegant, familiar cursive. I didn't feel ready. I desperately didn't want to see her final words trapped on a piece of paper. I wanted to hear them spoken directly from her lips. But she had crafted this message for me, knowing with absolute certainty that this exact moment would arrive. Taking a deep, stabilizing breath, I carefully broke the wax seal. "My dearest Chloe," the letter began, "if you are reading these words, it means I am no longer with you. And if I know your parents at all, they have already descended upon you like vultures, putting on a cheap performance of grief and sudden parental affection. I wish with all my heart that I could have shielded you from this confrontation, but there are ugly truths you must finally understand. You spent your entire childhood wondering why they left you. I saw the agonizing ache in your eyes every single time you sat by that front window, and I noticed how you asked fewer and fewer questions as the years marched on. I never wanted to crush your youthful spirit with the harsh reality. But the time has come for you to know everything. Your parents didn't just abandon you because they were overwhelmed, Chloe. They walked away because they tried to completely ruin me." My breath caught sharply in my throat, a cold shock freezing my limbs as I forced my eyes to scan the next line. "Years ago, they mistakenly believed they could outsmart me. Your father, my very own son, along with your mother, orchestrated a massive, fraudulent scheme to transfer all of my corporate assets into their personal accounts while I was away on an extended overseas business trip. They arrogantly assumed I was nothing more than a naive, simple high school principal who had no understanding of high-level finances. They thought their theft would go entirely unnoticed, but they severely underestimated me. The moment I discovered the paper trail and confronted them, I gave them a very clear, definitive choice. They could choose to stay, live completely modestly, work honest jobs, and rebuild their lives with a shred of basic human integrity. Or they could choose to walk away forever and receive absolutely nothing. They chose the money, Chloe. They chose a shot at wealth over their own 8-year-old daughter. Blinding tears instantly blurred my vision, and my fingers clenched the edges of the paper so tightly it began to crinkle. All those miserable years, I had completely blamed myself. I had spent countless nights agonizing over what I could have done differently, wondering why I wasn't good enough, pretty enough, or smart enough to make them stay. But the devastating truth was that it had never been about me at all. It had never been about a lack of love. It had always been about pure, insatiable greed. I swallowed the bitter lump rising in my throat and forced myself to continue reading through the tears. I have never for a single second regretted taking you in. You were the most magnificent, brilliant gift they unknowingly ever gave to me. Watching you grow into the extraordinary person you are, seeing your profound kindness, your unshakable resilience, and your immense intellect made me realize I had a sacred duty to protect you from them at all costs. That is precisely why I kept the true scale of my wealth a complete secret from you. I wanted you to grow up understanding the profound value of dedication, of fighting through adversity, and of building an identity entirely on your own merits. But now you must stand tall in the light of the truth. They will try every manipulative trick in the book. They will spin elaborate lies and pretend they care about your future. Do not believe a single word. You are vastly stronger than they will ever realize. You are a Montgomery woman, and we do not break. All my love forever, Nana Evelyn. I sat completely motionless in the quiet pew, the letter resting heavily in my lap as my pulse throbbed wildly. The reality of her words crashed over me in crushing, relentless waves. They hadn't just abandoned an innocent child, they had actively tried to rob their own mother, and the very second their greedy plan collapsed, they discarded me like an afterthought. It wasn't because they were financially struggling, or because they had no other options. It was because cold, hard cash meant entirely more to them than the flesh and blood they brought into this world. A sharp, incredibly bitter laugh escaped my lips into the empty church. They honestly believed they could just glide back into my universe and seize a fortune that didn't belong to them. They expected to find a weak, broken teenager who was still desperately starving for the parental affection she had once begged for. But Nana had anticipated their every move. She had spent a decade subtly fortifying my mind, preparing me precisely for this battlefield. I aggressively wiped the tears from my cheeks, straightened my shoulders, and gripped the gold key resting against my chest. I had wasted 10 long years waiting for them to come back, but the waiting was officially over. It was finally time for them to watch me walk away. They certainly didn't back down without a fight. Over the next several months, my parents exhausted every imaginable legal avenue trying to seize the fortune that did not belong to them. They hired expensive corporate lawyers to officially contest the validity of the will, but the judge dismissed it almost instantly. They audaciously claimed in court that Nana Evelyn was mentally incompetent when she drafted the documents, but our medical records proved that statement completely false. They even attempted a desperate legal argument stating that at 18 I was entirely too young and inexperienced to oversee such immense wealth, which was legally irrelevant under the terms of my emancipation. Every single time they tried to claw their way into the estate, they hit an unyielding brick wall, because Nana had mapped out this entire battlefield with flawless precision. Her will was entirely airtight, every single document filed perfectly, with zero loopholes or weak spots left exposed. Yet, their stubborn greed refused to let them accept reality. Their ultimate act of sheer desperation occurred roughly 3 months later. They aggressively stormed straight into the corporate headquarters of Montgomery Investments, shouting and demanding an immediate audience with the executive board. I was in the middle of a highly important financial meeting when building security called my office, asking how I wanted the disruption handled. My initial instinct was to have them quietly escorted out of the building by force, but a powerful voice inside me insisted that I needed to end this cycle myself. I stood tall and resolute as I stepped out of the executive elevator and walked into the grand marble lobby. I was wearing one of Nana's favorite tailored navy blazers, which I had proudly claimed as my own, and the gold key necklace rested firmly against my collarbone, a silent, powerful reminder of exactly who I was now. They spotted me the absolute second I approached. "You have absolutely no right to bar us from this building, Chloe." My mother snapped, her shrill voice echoing loudly off the polished stone walls. "This is our rightful family business. We built this legacy, and you are taking what belongs to us," my father added, his face completely flushed with absolute rage. I met their furious glares with total calmness, slowly folding my arms across my chest. "No, it actually belongs entirely to me." My mother let out a harsh, mocking scoff. "We are the ones who brought you into this world. You wouldn't possess a single thing in this life without us." A sharp, incredibly bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You didn't raise me or build my future. Nana did everything." Her eyes narrowed into venomous slits. "You cannot simply erase us from your existence, Chloe. We are still your legal parents." I took a deliberate step closer to them, dropping my voice into a cold, unwavering whisper. "You turned your backs on me 10 years ago. Now I am officially turning my back on you." They froze, completely caught off guard by my absolute resolve. For the first time, a genuine flicker of fear registered in their eyes. Not just the fear of losing out on millions of dollars, but the terrifying realization that they had completely lost their very last shred of control over my life. My father quickly clenched his jaw, trying to project an air of dominance. "If you refuse to give us our fair share, we will take this story straight to the media. The public and the news networks will absolutely love a scandalous story about a spoiled, ungrateful teenager stealing her parents' rightful inheritance." I tilted my head slightly, studying their desperate expressions with complete detachment. "Go right ahead. Tell them everything." My mother blinked in absolute confusion. "What?" I stepped directly into their space, my voice echoing clear and completely unshakable through the lobby. "Go tell the entire world exactly how you abandoned your innocent 8-year-old daughter on a gravel driveway. Tell the public how you actively tried to rob your own mother of her life savings, how you legally signed away your parental rights, and how you completely vanished for 10 long years, only showing your faces when you smelled an enormous fortune. Go on, tell them every single detail." My father opened his mouth to retort, but no sound came out and he quickly shut it. The desperate fire in my mother's eyes dimmed instantly. She turned her head toward my father, frantically searching his face for some kind of argument, an escape route, or a clever lie. But there was absolutely nothing left to say. They had lost the battle completely. They weren't the tragic victims in this story. They were the villains, and the reality of their defeat had finally crushed them. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the vast lobby. I could see the exact moment of total surrender on their faces as they realized there was nothing left to fight for. They had gambled with their daughter's life for money, and now they were walking away with absolutely nothing, just like before. My mother's upper lip curled in deep disgust, her voice barely dropping above a whisper. "You will live to regret this day, Chloe." I offered a calm, steady smile. "No, I really won't." And without another single word, they turned around, walked through the heavy glass doors, and exited my life for good. I let out a long, deep breath that I hadn't realized I was holding. The war was officially over. I glanced down at the gold key resting against my chest, my fingers tracing its polished edges. Nana had been entirely right. I was a Montgomery woman, and we do not break easily. I sat in Nana Evelyn's old study, which was officially my executive office now, watching quietly as James Morrison plugged a small black flash drive into his laptop. The bright screen flickered to life, and suddenly, there she was. Nana Evelyn appeared before me, wearing her familiar warm smile, her eyes radiating the exact same wisdom and strength I remembered so vividly. She looked healthy and remarkably strong. She must have recorded this private video message only a few weeks before her passing. "Chloe, my darling girl," she began, her voice completely steady and clear. "If you are watching this recording right now, then everything has unfolded exactly as I anticipated. And I know you, sweetheart. I know with absolute certainty that you are more than strong enough to handle this weight." I swallowed the heavy lump rising in my throat, my hands gripping the leather arms of the desk chair tightly. "Your parents made an appearance at my memorial service, didn't they?" She let out a soft, knowing chuckle on the screen. Of course they did. They genuinely believed they could swoop in and seize a legacy that was never theirs to begin with. Heavy tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to blink, keeping my gaze locked onto her face. But you must understand, Chloe, I didn't leave you $47 million just so you could sit on a mountain of wealth. I left you a vital mission. The video suddenly cut away from her face, transitioning into a moving montage of young children smiling, laughing, and playing on a beautiful, sunlit playground. Over the last decade, I quietly built the Montgomery Foundation completely in secret, Nana's voiceover explained beautifully. I used our financial success to provide safety, housing, and top-tier education to abandoned, neglected, and forgotten children who were discarded by the people who should have loved them. And as of today, the foundation belongs entirely to you. You are officially its new director, Chloe. You get to decide exactly how many thousands of innocent lives we are going to change for the better. I pressed my palm firmly against my chest, the cold metallic weight of the gold key necklace grounding me completely against the rush of emotion. Use our family fortune to put real good into this world, Chloe. Do not hoard it for status, and do not use it to control others. Use it to lift people out of the dark. That is our true family legacy. The laptop screen softly faded to black. I let out a long, peaceful breath as a strange, beautiful sense of tranquility settled deep over my soul. For months, I had been braced for an ugly, exhausting battle, standing my ground against biological parents who never deserved to hold that title. But the war was over, and now it was finally time to build something infinitely bigger and more meaningful than their petty greed. The weeks that followed were an absolute whirlwind of activity. I officially assumed total operational control of Montgomery Investments, stepping into high-stakes meetings with executive board members who had worked alongside Nana for decades. They were visibly skeptical at first, looking doubtful at the sight of an 18-year-old girl stepping up to run a multi-million-dollar financial empire. But the absolute second I walked into that grand boardroom, wearing Nana's vintage tailored principal blazer, I saw knowing, proud smiles instantly break across the faces of the board members who had known her best. They saw her unshakable spirit completely alive in me. I wasn't just a young heiress stumbling into a massive inheritance. I was a proud Montgomery woman ready to lead. There were certain things I consciously chose to keep completely identical to the past. Nana's old high-mileage sedan still sat parked in my garage, and even though I could easily afford any luxury sports car on the market, I couldn't bring myself to part with it. It served as a constant, beautiful reminder of exactly where I came from, and of the incredible woman who built an empire but chose to live a simple, humble life. Because true wealth has absolutely nothing to do with what you own. It is entirely about what you choose to do for others. And as I sat at my desk, picking up my pen to officially sign the very first round of full university scholarships for abandoned foster children, I finally understood the true meaning of the gold key around my neck. I wasn't just Nana Evelyn's financial heir. I was her living legacy. If you loved this emotional story of justice and legacy, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our upcoming real-life dramatic narratives. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.